What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you a recap of week number 9 of the 2024 college football season. The month of October is now officially over. We now head into the real kind of season here of the 2024 college football season. And when I say the month of November, that means, the postseason is right around the corner. We also got the first 12-team playoff. The first playoff rankings coming out pretty soon. So, yeah, this is where the real season begins. And then you also got your conference championship races. And, teams are still kind of, getting better as we go down the stretch. And usually in the month of November, that's where the upsets start to come around. But we saw a pretty good month of October. We saw the first 2 weekends, beat some upsets. And then the last 2 weeks were kind of quiet here in the month of October. And it was kind of a quiet weekend once again, but we did see a lot of close games, some really close upsets that were really close to happening. But I'm going to give you a recap here, give you my 5 biggest recaps of what I saw here in week number 9 of the 2024 college football season. And we'll start here with my number 5 biggest recap. And that is Oregon looks like the best team in the country. I think that looks like it's pretty clear, based on their performance against Illinois from yesterday afternoon. Yeah, Oregon does look like the best team in the country. I'm not saying they're fully like the best team in the country, but they look like it. So you look at Oregon, they defeated Ohio State back on October 12th. And, Oregon also has kind of been dominant ever since their first 2 games were really kind of tough for them. Remember they had some flat performances against Idaho and Boise State in those first 2 weeks of the season. But ever since those games, and ever since the third game, ever since beating Oregon State on the road, this team has looked a lot different. Dillon Gabriel looks like he's a lot better. And, they just got some really talented players on this team. The offense is there for them. And the defense is there for them as well. They just gave up 9 points here against this Illinois team. Really, Illinois had no shot in this game whatsoever. I mean, you look at Oregon's team, Oregon just has the best team in the country as of right now, and they look like the best team in the country just based off of their wins. Again, they beat Ohio State, that was their biggest win of the season so far, and then they got, the win over Illinois, another ranked team, which isn't a big win for them, but, they look like the best team in the country just based off of what I saw, and, based off of what we've seen, throughout the last, 2 months of the season. So, yeah, heading into the month of November, I think Oregon might be the best team in the country, it looks like right now, but you got other teams out there in the Big Ten that are still kind of not that far behind them. You got Penn State that survived in overtime against Wisconsin. I'll get to that in just a minute, but you got Indiana that, beat Washington by a couple of touchdowns, so Indiana is still alive in the Big Ten championship race. So, yeah, Oregon, we're talking about them mostly in this video, but the offense looks really good. Now, I would say in the second half, Oregon did not play pretty well. They only had 3 points in the second half. It seems like they just played maybe their second stringers, it looked like. And Dillon Gabriel actually played pretty well in this game. But, the first half, it was an offensive, performance by Oregon. But defensively, I would say that second half, they didn't really play that well. So maybe they're not the best team in the country, but they are definitely the best team in the country just heading into the month of November. So that is the biggest recap here that I'm looking at here for Oregon. So that is my number 5 biggest recap. Let's now move on to my number 4 biggest recap. And it's in the Big 12. BYU and Iowa State are now the teams to beat in the Big 12. I think that's really clear now as we head into the month of November. BYU beat UCF yesterday 37-24, so not by a big margin here for BYU, but they were still able to kind of be the better team here against this UCF team. I was kind of, maybe expecting an upset here, but, BYU just continues to prove everyone wrong. It seems like, first half, they seem like they start off slow, but then the second half, they start to kind of pull away from there. But, UCF just couldn't really get past this BYU defense. And, that was really the difference here for this BYU team was their defensive line. And their defense just overall is looking like it's going to get better. The offense is very good. And BYU is continuing to be the surprise team in the Big 12. I didn't really expect this team, to go into a chance to probably be undefeated here in the month of November. And I also kind of didn't expect this team to be a Big 12 championship contender. And there wasn't really a lot to take away from the Big 12. Iowa State had a bye week, so not much to talk about them. They're still undefeated, though, but they're the team to beat here in the Big 12. Boy, how about Kansas State and Kansas? What a finish to that game last night. How about the Wildcats surviving against the Jayhawks? Game-winning field goal makes the difference, and the Jayhawks once again come up short against their rivals. That was a great game, and that would have been probably the biggest upset of the weekend if Kansas State probably went down in the Big 12, but they still kind of have that one loss to BYU in the Big 12, so they're still right there as a Big 12 championship contender. Texas Tech lost to TCU 35-34. Oklahoma State still winless in the Big 12. They lose to Baylor 38-28. So Oklahoma State now is a kind of a disappointment as we head into the month of November. Baylor could get better down the stretch, but they're definitely not going to make it to the Big 12 championship. And then you got Colorado that beat Cincinnati last night. Travis Hunter played pretty well. And yeah, Colorado is definitely looking like maybe a team that could still sneak in there into the Big 12 championship unless we have some kind of chaos here in this conference for the rest of the way. And there wasn't really much to take away from the Big 12. And like I said, there wasn't really much to take away from this conference. But again, we're talking about BYU and Iowa State. They are the teams to beat in the Big 12. So that is my number 4 biggest recap. Moving on to number 3. This is not a big recap here, but I wanted to mention Notre Dame here. Notre Dame is getting better, and that's really all you can say here about the Fighting Irish. Notre Dame beat Navy yesterday. There was a lot of, doubt for Notre Dame going into this game. Navy, a lot of the talk here was about them kind of, pulling off the upset. And then also kind of, giving some Notre Dame, the Notre Dame defense some problems, but that didn't really turn out to be the case. Notre Dame took care of Navy 51-14 yesterday afternoon. Notre Dame definitely looks a lot better compared to where they were, in the early part of the season. Yeah, they beat Texas A&M back in week number 1, but, they lost to Northern Illinois in their second game of the season, but they have gotten so much better ever since that loss. Notre Dame is definitely looking like a playoff contender, and this looked like it could be a dangerous team as they head into the college football playoff. Notre Dame has a chance to win out. If they can go 11-1 the rest of the way, this team has a chance to probably be a dangerous team in the playoff, in the first ever 12-team playoff. I'm kind of anxious to see where they're going to be ranked at. That Texas A&M game is looking like a really good win for them. So yeah, I think that with that, win over Texas A&M on their resume, I think that's going to really help out Notre Dame's chances of being a top 10 team. Now, I don't think they'll get in as a, maybe like a single-digit seed. They'll probably be not anywhere near that top 6 and everything because they don't play in a conference championship, but they'll definitely be in there as an at-large team. So yeah, this Notre Dame team is really a team to keep an eye on here for the rest of the way. You look at their schedule, it kind of sets up well for the rest of the way for the Fighting Irish. They got to play USC at the end of the year. That might be their next toughest game on their schedule, but they also got to play Army, another triple option team, which I think they'll definitely be a big favorite in that game because Army is undefeated, but Notre Dame gets that game at home. I just think Notre Dame, when it comes to their defense against the triple option, they are definitely prepared for it, and this offense just played pretty well yesterday. Riley Leonard used his legs, and I think this Notre Dame team is looking really a lot better as they go throughout the rest of the season. And their defense, again, made the difference. They, forced the turnovers on Navy early in this ball game. And I think that kind of, really changed the game from there. Notre Dame overall took care of business, 51-14. So Notre Dame is getting better as we go in here into the month of November. And they definitely do have a path to make it to that college football playoff. So watch out here for this Notre Dame team. That is my number 3 biggest recap. All right, to the most important recaps now, number 2 and number 1. We'll start with number 2 here. Ohio State and Penn State overlooked their opponents, and I think that was really clear yesterday. We'll start with Ohio State, escaping with a win over Nebraska 21-17. And who saw this coming? I think this game was definitely a fluke. I think Ohio State was definitely overlooking Nebraska and definitely looking ahead to next weekend because they do play Penn State coming up this weekend, and that'll be a big game. But yeah, Ohio State definitely did not look like the same team that we saw mainly against Oregon. They were very competitive in that game, had a chance to win it, but yeah, this was a very tough game here for Ohio State. They had a bye week before playing this game as well, so they didn't have, a chance to really, the bye week just didn't really help out for the Buckeyes. So yeah, Ohio State definitely did not look like a top 5 team yesterday. But like I mentioned, I think this is a game that was a fluke here. Nebraska really gave Ohio State a lot of problems in the second half. The defense in Nebraska played pretty well. But yeah, Nebraska, I got to give them credit here. They definitely almost pulled off a huge upset here. If they would have pulled off a huge upset in this one, I think it probably would have been the biggest upset so far of the season, especially in the Big Ten, because if, Ohio State and Penn State both lost, I would have probably had a takeaway that says the Big Ten is very interesting, and now you got Oregon and Indiana probably could sit at the top of the Big Ten, and those two teams could probably meet for the Big Ten championship, but that is not the case as of right now. Ohio State does survive against Nebraska, though, 21-17. And then the Penn State, Drew Aller gets injured in the first half. That's going to be a big question mark there for this Penn State offense as they go against Ohio State this weekend. But their defense is obviously the difference. Penn State's defense looking like it's getting a lot better. The offense, obviously is not really maybe the same without Drew Aller in there. But, yeah, the defense kind of, made the difference here. And I think going into this game between Ohio State and Penn State, I feel like, it's going to be a defensive battle just based off of what we saw from this past weekend. Ohio State and Penn State just overlooked their opponents, and I think that's the reason why they were just not really focused on this weekend. They're definitely looking ahead to the next weekend, and that's going to be the case here. This game will probably really decide how good Penn State really is, but we know Ohio State is really good. They took on Oregon already, but this is still a really good team. But Penn State, we'll see how good they really are against Ohio State coming up this weekend. So, yeah, that's my number 2 biggest recap. Ohio State and Penn State overlooked their opponents this weekend. I think these two games were definitely a fluke. So let's now get into my number 1 biggest recap here, and that is Texas A&M sits at the top of the SEC. That was made very clear last night. The Aggies beat LSU 38-23. Well, I tell you what, LSU made a lot of mistakes here in the second half. Texas A&M outscoring LSU in the second half, 31-6. Texas A&M, they bench Connor Wigman. They bring in Marcelo Reed. He comes in, provides a really big spark here for this Texas A&M team using his legs, and I think, the dual threat quarterbacks kind of give LSU's defense some problems, and that was the case here in the second half. Yeah, this Texas A&M offense got things going here in the second half. Again, they outscored LSU 31-6, and, the offense just continued to be very explosive from there. The running game, they had over, 200 yards of rushing in this game on the ground, so, yeah, they really wore down this LSU defensive line, because LSU was up by 10 at the half. Connor Wigman was playing in this game, but it was inconsistent, and, LSU just kept pressuring him. And I just think with Reed in there, I feel like, with Marcelo Reed in there, I feel like Texas A&M becomes a very dangerous team, and now they sit at the top here of the SEC. They now improved to 5-0 in conference play. Texas A&M's schedule kind of sets up really well the rest of the way. I believe they got to play South Carolina on the road this weekend, but they still got to play Texas at the end of the year, so that will be a very tough game. But the good news is, for the Aggies, they get that game at home. So this Texas A&M team has a chance to probably make it to Atlanta in the SEC championship, and if they can win the SEC championship, this team probably could get in there as a top 4 team at the conference championship level. So watch out here for Texas A&M. The other games that happened in the SEC over the weekend, boy, how about Texas surviving against Vanderbilt? That was a close game there. Vanderbilt's Cinderella story comes down to an end. I still think they can try to make it to a bowl game, but yeah, they were very close to pulling off another top 5 upset. How about Arkansas blowing out Mississippi State 58-25? Kentucky losing again to Auburn 24-10. Kentucky just looks like a very big disappointment. That was kind of a very important win for Auburn, though. And yeah, Texas A&M and LSU, I think, was the biggest game of the weekend in the SEC. And then, of course, you had Tennessee with a bye week. And then how about Alabama and Missouri? Alabama off to a rough start in that first half, but they pull away because of their defense and the offense with Jalen Milroe with his using his legs. That kind of, made Alabama pull away from there, and they won 34-0. So yeah, the SEC continues its wildest season ever here, but Texas A&M is now sitting at the top of the SEC. They have no losses, 5-0 in conference play. I still don't think LSU is out of it, and I also forgot to mention another SEC game. Ole Miss coming back from behind and beating Oklahoma 26-14. So yeah, just another competitive weekend in the SEC conference, but Texas A&M now sits at the top of the SEC. So those are my 5 biggest recaps here from week number 9 of the 2024 college football season. And also in the last weekend of the month of October, we now head into the month of November. This is where the real season begins. So buckle up. It's going to be a really wild season the rest of the way. And we got the 12-team playoff. And then, of course, we got the first playoff rankings coming out next Tuesday night on election night. So that is my 5 biggest recaps here in week number 9. Let me guys know what you think about my recap here for week number 9. And give me your thoughts about week number 9 down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.